Hi everyone. So this video is for CRIM210 students who are looking for some feedback or some guidance with respect to writing the second mini paper. I'm going to share a couple of versions of my screen here. All right, so the purpose of the paper here is to basically have a look at the Youth Criminal Justice Act and talk about what is potentially wrong with it. So your goal is to identify a section of the YCJA that you think contrasts with theory or research that you've learned about in the past. So this could be from other courses, or it could be from theories that we've discussed in the first half of CRIM 210. It could also be based on research that you read as part of paper number one. What I also want to make clear is that you don't have to focus on just the YCJA. I wanted to keep it kind of straightforward by saying what is wrong with the YCJA, but you can focus on any policy, criminal justice system policy that impacts youth, even if it is indirectly impacting youth. So to give you an example of that, I've got up here the R versus Gladue case. So this was an adult case, but it did require that all persons who are being sentenced in Canada who are from an Indigenous background have what's called a Gladue report completed on them, and it'll be your responsibility to read up on that report. But basically, this has impacted how Indigenous youth are processed under the YCJA, and so you could refer to this specific case here. You could also have a look at, for example, Ewart versus Canada. I talked about this in the lecture on psychopathy, and you could describe how this case might impact the use of, for example, risk assessments within the YCJA and how that affects youth. So returning to the paper, again, you can focus on a specific section of the YCJA. So if you just go to the YCJA website that you can see on the screen here, you have the entire YCJA laid out here by section. You can also search up here. So you could search sentencing, and it'll probably take you to about section 38. At least we would hope it'll take you to section 38. Yeah, here's one of the key sections on sentencing that you can have a look at. So there are different sections here that you can go through to have a look at the impact of the YCJA on sentencing decisions on youth. So here is section 38, the core sentencing principles that you can have a read through there. You could also, for example, look at statutes that were intended to impact the YCJA, for example, the Safe Streets and Communities Act. So that's, again, you could look up youth, and you could have a look at the influence that this act intended to have on different youth criminal justice act principles, policies, or how these policies were enacted or followed. So this will take a little bit more outside research than just what's discussed in lecture. But if you have a look at a couple of lectures, especially the lecture that's on courts and corrections, a little bit more the YCJA case law will be discussed. The lecture 8 that's coming up this week will talk a little bit more in detail about what the YCJA is, how it functions, and which type of justice model the YCJA is. So for paper number 2, what are the most important criteria are numbers 5 and number 6, but we'll start in order with criteria number 1. So much like the first paper, your goal is just to introduce the purpose of the paper, make it clear to the reader why your paper is important. You have to have a rationale for why you think that addressing this particular aspect of the YCJ is important. You can keep this short, but it has to go beyond like this is something that affects youth. Everything in the YCJ is going to affect youth. Why is this particular section of interest to you, but not just because it's of personal interest? Why do you think it's important? And try to do your best to link the importance back to things like theory, policy. Maybe you can revisit the lecture on the magnitude of youth crime and think about how this policy might, for example, influence the overrepresentation of Indigenous youth or lead to ineffective rehabilitation solutions that increase the likelihood of youth reoffending, anything like that. So you're going to talk about the specific aspect of the YCJ that you're focusing on. Maybe it's specifically the YCJ, maybe it is the Safe Streets and Communities Act. Then you're going to discuss you're going to, again, not get into detail, but you will identify where this law has been applied. So maybe you're going to be discussing cases that have occurred in the media. Maybe you'll be referring to a specific case law. I'll go through some examples later in this presentation. So what you want to talk about in the paper is the theory or research that you feel contradicts or shows that the YCJA is not following evidence-based practices. So you just want to briefly introduce the theory or research that is going to frame your argument. And then you're going to identify what you might want to do about this law. So is it beyond repair and we just need to abolish it? Do we need to change it? And then more importantly, you'll need to think about how are we going to replace it. So later on in the essay, you're going to be required to think about how would you replace the law or change the law in order to bring it into accordance with the theory or research that you've chosen to focus on. So for criteria number 2, you're just going to provide a brief introduction to the YCJA, including its principles and the overall philosophy of the Act. This is something that I discussed in the lecture video, but it is also something that you can find right at the very front end of the YCJA. You can find the Declaration of Principle. You can begin to get a pretty clear sense of what the core purpose of the YCJA actually is. The Bell textbook also talks about this as well. And then again, just very briefly identifying the section or philosophy that you are responding to. Just keep it just like a basic reminder sentence. This doesn't have to be anything especially detailed. These are all just very, very basic sections. They're trying to help keep your reader engaged and following along. So criteria number 4 is to describe how the YCJA or a particular law has been applied in practice. So whether it has influenced a specific court case or controversy in the media. So for example, I've got a bunch of different links here. You could look at specific court cases. So here we have New Brunswick versus GJ. Usually when you see initials, you can begin to identify cases that involve youth. You can also find media cases that talk, for example, about the conditions under which it's appropriate for giving youth an adult sentence. And so you're more than welcome to use this specific story or others like it to refer to how the YCJA principle is actually being applied in practice. So basically, this is a question of sentencing. So you would just return to the Youth Criminal Justice Act. You would have a look at adult sentencing. You might even just be able to quickly pull it up here. I think I actually searched the wrong box here. We'll go back to the YCJA and we'll just go to sentencing and adult sentences. And then you can talk about how some of this is being influenced or being determined to influence youth being given adult sentences. Again, very important so that students don't make a mistake here. An adult sentence doesn't mean that a 16-year-old, for example, is sent to adult custody. This means they're given an adult length sentence. So the YCJA sets out that youth cannot receive sentences that would be longer than what an adult would receive. If a youth is sentenced as an adult, then all of a sudden the court is allowed to sentence them as an adult and give them a length of custody sentence that would resemble what an adult would receive. So basically, you're just looking for a news article, or here's another one about limiting criminal trials involving youth in terms of how quickly courts must bring youth to trial. And this has implications for social learning theory, for example, for deterrence and the importance from specific deterrence regarding the celerity and immediacy of punishment. So again, that's quite relevant. You could also, for example, begin to have a look at different platforms of different political parties in British Columbia or in Canada, and take a look at how they are influencing or might influence case processing under the YCJA. So we just saw the one for Conservative, and then right here is the NDP action plan. So you can have a look through these two to begin to get a sense of how They might be influencing the carrying out of YCJA policy. Then we have specific youth court cases, so R versus DB, Supreme Court judgment. This case, which you can hear more about in the lecture on courts and corrections, effectively struck down presumptive offenses, which meant that at the time, a presumptive offense meant that the youth basically had to show on the balance of probabilities that they should not be sentenced as an adult. This decision was struck down in R versus DB, and you could consider the implications that this might have for the process through which adult sentences are levied. So this case did not say that adult sentences were not allowed, but basically flip the onus back to Crown Counsel to show why an adult sentence should be administered by the court. So if you're looking for case law, one of the great ways to look is just through Canley. I've got it here, and you can just go to Supreme Court of Canada. You don't have to be under Supreme Court of Canada, but you can look for YCJA or youth custody or anything like that. The SFU library also has a variety of databases. You can see Canley at the top, but a few others here that you're more than welcome to use that would be effective for doing some of the background research on the case law that is going to be of interest to you. So the article that you find does not have to necessarily be critical of the YCJA section or policy that you're focused on. It can even be positive regarding the section that you've chosen to focus on. It's your job just basically to say why the law is problematic, and criteria 4 is, or excuse me, criteria 5, going to get into how you go about describing why the policy or philosophy is not appropriate. So before you start the paper and start writing everything up, you don't want to pick a policy of the YCJA or philosophy and just beginning to complete sections 1 through 4. You want to first think about the policy and think about why it does not fit with what we know about theories or theories or empirical research on youth offending. So your goal is to show the selected policy or philosophy will not actually be effective in reducing youth crime, but your argument cannot be based on your own personal opinion that you just, based on your political ideology, you don't think that this will work. You have to ground your opinion in empirical research or criminological theory and not just your opinion. So you have to explain how and why the policy contradicts theory and research. You can't just say that it does contradict theory or research. You can't just say, well, social bond theory says attachment is important, and this section will reduce youth attachment to parents. You have to actually explain how it would reduce attachment to parents and why this might be a bad thing. And you're more than welcome to reuse sources from paper number 1 to make your argument here, to draw upon the theory and research that you used in the past. Criteria 6 is where you're going to do a little bit of problem solving and explain what should be done to address the inconsistency between law and research. So if you're going to abolish or repeal the law, think about why this should be done and any potential ramifications of no longer having this law in place. If you're going to alter the law by rewording it or replacing the law with something else, you want to have the new law follow in accordance with the theory or research that you referred to in criteria number 5. So you want to think about, how does your law actually follow evidence-based practices? How does it actually align with theory or research? And again, you want to just make it easy for your TAs to see that you are thinking about how your solution aligns with theory or research. Be very clear and very explicit about that. So that's all that I'll have to really talk about for paper number 2. Again, I have office hours that you're welcome to come to, and you're more than welcome to also reach out to your TAs to get feedback. You're also allowed to bring your papers with you to office hours. We're not here to write the papers for you, but we can definitely give you feedback on whether there are areas of improvement or things that you're doing well. So good luck with the writing, and we'll see you all next time we're in lecture.